from people where individuals were injected with bubonic plague and yellow fever, where people were thrown in vats of ice water to see how long they could last. Just terrible things. The American medical community and government found those experiments so distasteful that we decided to try 23 Nazi doctors.
Where did these trials take place?
They took place in Nuremberg, Germany, in 1946 and 47. At the end of that trial...
Who was the judge and jury?
The judges were American jurists. There were 4 judges from America who tried the Nazis. Now, this is different than the war crimes trial. That was a trial for the military, the industrial, the diplomatic leaders of Germany, and they were being tried by a tribunal of American, Russian, English, and French judges.
Mm-hmm.
The doctor's trial was initiated just by the United States, and we had 4 judges there. One was, I believe, a Supreme Court judge. The other 3 were state judges in America. They listened to the evidence. At the end of the trial, they hung 7 of the Nazi doctors. Many others got long prison terms. And then when it was all over, the American jurists came up with a body of regulations or rules or principles, the Nuremberg Code, that was designed to prevent any of these unethical experiments from ever taking place again. Unfortunately, that code was never really adopted by America in the post-war period. In fact, it was almost as if that code was placed on the Titanic and it sunk between Nuremberg and Philadelphia.
Let me ask you this. What was the defense arguments of these particular German doctors that were on trial?
Well, interestingly enough, one of the defense arguments they made that they hadn't done anything different than what was being done in America. This was a little bit of a shock for the American jurists and the people in the Nuremberg courthouse to listen to, because I'm sure they weren't even aware that there were prisoners in America who were being used as test subjects. But the Nazi doctors and their defenders, the attorneys, knew about it, and they trotted out different examples whereby prisoners in America were being used as guinea pigs. One of the big examples were the malaria experiments that were taking place in prisons in America.
Go ahead. Tell me, can you get into the specifics of some of what these doctors used as their defense? Some of the illustrations and examples that you enumerated in Acres of Skin.
Well, one of the experiments they brought up were the malaria experiments that had been taking place during the Second World War. As you and your audience is aware, in the Pacific Theater of Operations during that war, there were many American soldiers who were succumbing not to bullets or explosions, but to the Anopheles mosquito and malaria. And the generals of the Army went to the military and said that you've got to do something to assist us. And they decided to set up experimental testing plants at 4 prisons, the 2 most prominent being Stateville and Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. There were many, many prisoners who volunteered to be bitten by Anopheles mosquitoes, and there are pictures in my book of prisoners laying out in the hospital ward having mosquitoes bite them in the bellies, then getting the malaria disease, and then having the doctors try and come up with some sort of potion or elixir to try and rectify the problem.
Now, this happened in the United States prior to the German experiments that caused the Nuremberg trial. Is that correct?
They were going on at the exact same time. The German experiments ran from the late 30s through the mid-40s until finally the war ended in the spring of 45. So there were a tremendous number of experiments taking place by the Nazis, as well as, in fact, the Japanese during those early years of the war. But America was also doing experiments on prisoners. In my book, I mentioned as early as 1915, Dr. Goldberger was using prisoners in Rankin Prison Farm in Mississippi to come up with some sort of answer to the problem of pellagra in the Deep South. There was a doctor at San Quentin in California from 1918 to 1922 who was doing testicular transplants. He believed that if you removed the testicles from a young man and gave them to an old man, that old gentleman would be revitalized physically, emotionally, sexually. And he did hundreds of experiments.
Before you go on, I was reading that portion, and I'm like, so how do you make sure that the transplant took place? These old men have to have sex and maybe produce a baby. Now, where are these children?
Well, I don't know if there were any children, but Dr. L.L. Stanley, who was the prison doctor at San Quentin at the time, truly believed that his patients on the street, these old men who were suffering from old age, were very much rejuvenated by having the testicular matter of younger men placed in their testicles.
Now, wait a minute. What young man is going to offer to give up his gonads?
Well, initially, it was a dead man. What Stanley initially did was sever the testicles of recently executed prisoners.
Get out of here! You're killing me! No!
Yes, sir. That is what he did. He initially used the severed testicles of recently executed death penalty prisoners, and then he reattached those testicles to his elderly patients on the street. And in his own words, as the printed word says from articles that he wrote on it, his patients were very much rejuvenated, both physically and sexually and spiritually.
That's crazy. That's mad science.
Further than that, it goes further. What then happened, Brother R.A., is that Dr. Stanley became so convinced this was the answer to many of our problems that he, in fact, started to use testicular matter from animals and placed them in humans.
Did you say animals like rams and lambs and...
wild boars, dogs, and wolves. He would take the testicular matter of those animals and then perform surgery on some prisoners.
Wait a minute. List those animals again.
Wild boars, rams, dogs, wolves, and there were articles that he wrote in medical journals. It's mentioned in my book that he was of the belief that this was the answer to inevitable and endless youth. And, what we have here, Brother R.A., are examples whereby doctors, for right or wrong, thought they had the answer to something. There were experiments with pellagra, with tuberculosis, with other problems in society that doctors in the back room or in the prison hospital thought they had the answer to. They wanted to do an experiment. And just like you have in the Tuskegee syphilis study, these doctors went to institutions where they basically thought they were throwaway people, that they were people of less value, and therefore you could do some things to them that may be injurious, but if they were injured, it wouldn't be as important or as serious as if you did it to somebody who was a member of the Chamber of Commerce or somebody who played in the string section of the Boston Symphony or something like that. So throughout the 20th century, particularly after the Second World War, you see doctors going into institutions that held the mentally retarded, the emotionally disturbed,